In my childhood, a village with a strange name, Blue Jellyfish, was my second home. By the way, there were no jellyfish in the local waters, but I had never thought to find out the origins of the name. When I first heard it, I had associations with the Blue Lagoon, but in fact, the place didn't resemble anything like that. The spacious, green village with small, well-kept houses stood by a rushing river. It was surrounded by dense pine forests. The air was clean, uncontaminated, pristine, which is why the sky was deep blue, especially on a fine winter day. My father was born in Blue Jellyfish, and when he grew up, he moved to the city, where he married my mother. Nevertheless, I had been going to the village to see my grandparents when I was a child. I thought it would always be like that, but when I turned 18, tragedy struck. Grandpa came down with a fever and didn't survive the illness. Grandma buried him and moved to town. It was painful for her to live in a place where everything was associated with her late husband. That's how my trips to Blue Jellyfish ended. My grandmother didn't sell the house, and a few years later, my father and I went there to decide what to do with it. Dad wasn't eager to sell it, because it was a place where he had grown up. The building was dusty, cracked, and overgrown with ivy on the outside. We spent 3 days making it look more or less decent. When we got tired, my father said,
"Well, we've done a good job. Now we can rest. Don't you want to go for a walk in the village? We've been stuck at home since we arrived."
I agreed. My father and I walked around. Then he lagged behind, meeting our neighbor. They had a lot to discuss, but I got bored and went further, to the river and to the field. It was nice in the village. The air was full of freshness. Nature was blooming. You won't find such beauties in the city. I was walking and enjoying the surroundings when suddenly I noticed that I was not alone in the field. Ahead of me walked a girl I didn't know, though I knew almost everyone in the village. At least, that was 2 years ago. She was beautiful. Her wheat-colored hair was long, her skin pale, and her eyes big and deep gray. She was wearing a light cotton dress. Isn't she cold? I thought. I came closer and wondered where to start a conversation. Unfortunately, I wasn't good at talking to girls, even in my 20th year. The lack of experience was caused by my studies.
"Hey, who are you? I haven't seen you before. Are you from around here?"
I asked. She smiled charmingly and strangely in response, which sent shivers down my spine. Mysterious, charming. At that moment, I believed in the phrase, love at first sight.
"I'm local, but I haven't been here for a long time."
And her voice was so melodious and gentle.
"Oh, me too,"
I stammered, chewed the words, and felt like an idiot.
"My name is Jake. I used to come here when my grandparents lived in the village. They don't live here now, but my father and I came to put the house in order. Maybe we'll sell it."
I blurted out. Why am I reporting so much? It's all nerves. I don't know what to say, so I blurt out the first thing that comes into my head.
"And I am Vega,"
she said. That's a strange name. Nevertheless, I've heard weirder.
"Do you often go to the river?"
"Well, yeah. No. Well, I used to go quite often when I came here, but I haven't been there in a long time."
I was even more embarrassed. She's so calm and sweet, and she makes me feel nervous. So we got to talking. Little by little, we walked across the field, talking about general topics. I was even more convinced that Vega was mysterious, a little strange, but terribly charming and charismatic. While we were talking, I forgot why I had come to this village. Now, I was sure that I wasn't leaving until something would happen between me and Vega. She was evasive when I asked her about her family and home, saying that she had gone to town to study, but now she was back and didn't know if she would leave again. When it came to her parents, she was also reluctant to answer. The only thing she said about her family is that her parents were strict, and she had a few sisters, so we chatted till 8 o'clock in the evening. Then she had to come back home urgently, and, without any explanation, hurried off in the direction of the woods. I asked if we could see each other tomorrow, and she promised to be in the same place. That's how our first meeting ended. I didn't tell my father about Vega, because I expected him to ask me a lot of stupid questions. He often tried to talk to me about girls, and it was always a stuffy, irritating conversation. So, out of harm's way, I told my father that I was just strolling along the river, admiring the view. He believed me, and that's all that matters. At night, I dreamt that I was seeing that girl again. We were chatting by the river. I touched her hand, hugged her, held her close to me, but for some reason, her skin was as cold as a dead man's. I kept trying to warm her up, rubbing her palms, hugging her slim shoulders. She drowned in my arms, so fragile, so tender, and then we kissed. And at that moment, I opened my eyes and saw that Vega's pupils were black as coal, and her skin was white and blue with veins. She looked like a dead man who had come back to life. I screamed, pulled away from her, and she came closer. Her head bowed sideways in confusion, as if wondering why I was crawling from her. Also, her hands were distorted. Long black claws were sticking out of her thin fingers, and her skin was cracking and peeling. At that point, she looked scarier than a living corpse. I woke up in a cold sweat. That weird and creepy dream was still in my head. I had already drunk some water and wandered back and forth across the room, catching my breath. But still, I kept seeing the image of Vega, that enchanting creature, looking like a zombie or a witch from some horror movie. I went to the window, looking out at the pine forest in the twilight that stood in front of our house. The trees sagged under the gust of the strong pre-fall wind. Suddenly, I noticed a pale, small, human-looking silhouette gliding among the grove. For some reason, I immediately thought of her, but not of the Vega I had met in the field that afternoon, but of the one in my dream. Vega, she was driving me crazy. The next day I went to the field again. The wind was even stronger, so I pulled on a warm jacket and thick-soled sneakers before I went out. The clouds were gathering in the sky, hinting that it might rain soon. Hopefully, it wouldn't be a thunderstorm. Lightning might be dangerous for a person in a field. Vega came to see me. A chill ran down my spine when I looked at her, wearing the same thin dress. She was definitely not prepared for the weather. I offered her my jacket, but she flatly refused, claiming that she wasn't cold at all. I touched her pale hand, which looked as though she had never tanned. Her skin was icy, but she wasn't shivering. Vega smiled faintly, pulling her palm away. I thought something unkind flashed across her smile.
I'm not cold, I swear. My parents made me used to the cold when I was a little girl,
she assured me, and touched my hair, fixing it. Her touch made me feel nervous, but I wished it was much longer. I wished fiercely that I could hug her tightly in my arms, but we had known each other for 2 days, and there were no obvious signs of affection, neither from me nor from her. I wanted to take her to the village, to walk through the streets on the outskirts, but Vega refused, saying that she liked it better in the fields and by the river. I couldn't invite her to visit because of my father. Maybe I would do that a little later, when I would decide to introduce Vega. Meanwhile, we strolled along the noisy river and talked again. We talked about our interest and about the village itself. Sometimes I remembered fragments from my nightmare, but quickly brushed them aside. Vega was beautiful, lively, cool, and mischievous at the same time.
Have you ever thought about the name of the village? Well, blue jellyfish sounds strange, doesn't it?
It's simple,
she answered, looking at me with big eyes.
There used to be jellyfish here, in the lake where the river flows into it. Freshwater jellyfish with a bluish hue. They became extinct over time, but the name remained.
I was surprised, because I had never heard this story before. not even from the wisest local old grannies, who in fact knew a lot about village life since the war.
How do you know that?
She looked away, kind of embarrassed.
My mother told me.
She said briefly, making an intonation point, hinting that she would say no more. Alright, I didn't pay much attention. When I got home, I asked my father about that story for the first time, and he frowned in bewilderment.
I have no idea why they called it that. No one remembers.
He grinned.
Why do you ask?
I shrugged.
No reason. Never mind.
Vega and I continued spending time together. Every day we met in the field or by the river, and not a single time we went far from there. Each time she came in that light white dress that barely reached her thighs. Each time at 8, she would run away deep into the grove, hiding behind the trunks of thick pines. She didn't invite me to visit and didn't respond to such hints. Nevertheless, I didn't dare to ask her directly. The more often we saw each other, and the more I found her strange. She was withdrawn, closed, even kind of... It's hard to explain, but I think I saw some kind of deep danger in her. It was reflected in my dreams, my nightmares. In them, I would regularly follow Vega deep into the grove, and the farther I went, the more the trees would distort, turning into the grim ghosts. Then she would turn around, and again she would appear to me as eerie, undead. Her eyes were filled with thick black blood, and her mouth was sprouting fangs. Her skin was peeling away. She didn't look human anymore. The dreams made me shiver. What was that? This had never happened to me before. I've liked girls in the past, most of them unrequited, of course, but I didn't dream of them as monsters. What's wrong with me? I dared to invite Vega to my house. She beckoned, teasing me, and I couldn't hold on much longer. I wanted to bring her home, even despite my father's lectures. It was time to do at least something about it, to get out of the vicious cycle of our strange field dates. I was sure it would make the nightmares go away too, but it didn't turn out so smoothly. Vega refused to go with me. She said her parents wouldn't allow that. I offered all the possible variants, though the answer remained the same.
No!
She said angrily, and I swear for a moment I thought her eyes were black as night. Just like in my dreams, a chill ran down my spine and made me stop insisting.
Alright,
I sighed.
Just don't be mad, please.
And then the shadow of a smile flashed across her lips, warming me again.
I'll go now. It's time.
She said, and kissed the corner of my lips. It was the first time in all the times we'd met. I was aroused and took her hand.
Can't we walk some more?
I can't.
She pressed her lips together in a strip.
I have to go. I'll see you tomorrow. Same time. Go home.
Dad was already thinking about leaving the other day, and I couldn't think of an excuse to stay for some more time. Definitely, I couldn't stay in the village forever. My studies and work were waiting in town. That made me even more reluctant to let Vega go. I squeezed her hand.
Please, let's walk some more.
I said no!
She suddenly shouted angrily, which made me recoil from the power in her ringing, usually quiet voice. Vega slipped out of my grip and rushed into the woods. I should have turned around then, walked back home, but I didn't. Instead, I followed her into the woods because I wanted to finally find out where she lived. The darkness was thickening all around me. The crowns were blocking the light, and the day was coming to its end. I followed a white silhouette that looked like a feather in its lightness and grace. The girl easily ran between the bushes, skipping over the protruding roots and thick trunks. I followed her, a little more clumsy. Lots of branches blocked my sight, and I almost twisted my leg, but still, I continued walking, trying not to lag behind, and not to lose sight of her. At that time, my mind was absolutely empty. I didn't even think how I would find my way back afterward.
Well, the woods will soon be over. She'll come out to the house, and it'll be easier to find the way there, right?
I thought, keeping my eyes on Vega. My plan was doomed to failure. We were sinking deeper into the grove. The light was dwindling, and the trees were clinging to one another. I was tired of walking, but she had plenty of energy. She walked easily, though she had already slowed down somehow. I tried to be farther away, quieter, so she wouldn't notice me. But suddenly, Vega came to a complete halt. She froze, like a statue, and it was as if the forest stood still with her. The wind died down. The branches stopped swaying. The air thickened. I kept walking as if I was spellbound. I knew that the rustling of my footsteps was already audible to her, but I kept walking forward, as if at some invisible call. I was no longer aware of my actions. My legs stopped obeying me, like in those siren songs. A beautiful song beckoned and called me, only this time, the song was inaudible. She was the forest itself. And when I came very close, the girl turned around. She looked at me sadly, with deep disappointment and resentment in her eyes. It was as if she was saying,
I asked you not to follow me.
But I had broken that unspoken rule, and now I was going to pay the price. That's where the real hell began. While my legs were still carrying me forward without my involvement, Vega's face suddenly contorted. Her eyes darkened. Her skin turned white and blue, and she looked like the ghost or a living dead from my dreams. It was hard to breathe, but I began to resist. My mind commanded me to leave, to run away, but my body wouldn't listen. My legs and arms stiffened. I walked toward the fiend with peeling skin, black claws, and sharp fangs. The next thing I felt was her fangs digging into my shoulder, and a wave of pain piercing my body. No longer was that sweet Vega in front of me. It was a real demon from the depths of hell. I summoned up whatever strength I had left in me, and sharply ordered myself to move. Surprisingly, it worked. I kicked the monster in the chest, and the girl hit her back against the trunk. It was my chance to run away. She got up and rushed after me. The claws flew through, grazing the skin of my neck from behind. I screamed but didn't stop, dashing back at full speed, hoping the trail would lead me out of the forest. She ran after me, literally breathing in my back. At one point, the creature stretched its arm forward and grabbed my leg, piercing the flesh. I fell chest down on the ground, grabbed a snag lying nearby, twisted around, and hit the monster in the face. The creature roared in an inhuman voice and took its claws off my leg. The calf bled. I crawled first, then jumped up and ran on, limping. The trees were all around me. It seemed as if the pine forest itself was trying to stop me. Branches hit my face and legs. Roots kept getting under my feet, making me stumble. It was pitch dark too, so I couldn't make out the road. At one point, Vega rushed towards me, leaned on my back, and we rolled down a slope into the moat. We hit a pine tree that grew on the way, and the creature suddenly went limp, hitting its head hard.
This is my chance,
I decided, and rushed away again, even though everything hurt and didn't obey. All the clothes were already torn and stained with blood. Bruises seemed to cover the whole body. Suddenly, the moonlight flashed ahead, the trees ended, and I fell out into a wide field. I heard a murmuring noise. The river. I got out. It was so hard to believe. That was not the end yet. It was necessary to get up and run again. I stopped only, reaching the house. Fortunately, my father was asleep. I slumped into the bathroom and locked myself in, catching my breath. All night, I washed off the blood, treated the wounds, and bandaged myself. Till the very morning, I didn't unlock the door and didn't even dare to doze off. Of course, I wiped bloodstains and streaks off the bathtub and sink. The next day, in the morning, we left the blue jellyfish. But my story didn't end there, and the fact that I see Vega in my dreams every night is not the only reason. 6 months later, I returned to the village, this time without my father. I categorically refused to approach the river, the field, or the forest. Instead, I talked to the villagers, trying to find out about the local horror stories, trying to figure out if anyone had ever talked about the undead I had encountered 6 months before. No one gave the proper answers. Then I was getting desperate and had already decided to drive back when an old man came out to me. I didn't recognize him, but it didn't matter. After all, he gave me the answer I had been looking for.
Local people used to believe that we had the biggest accumulation of noon witches here at the Blue Jellyfish.
The old man said.
Noon witches?
Yes, there were lots of stories about them, but we used to think of them as beautiful and charming maidens who wandered here in the meadows and woods. Run away if you meet one, otherwise your life will be doomed.
Do you happen to know why the village was called so?
The old man raised his eyebrows in surprise.
No, nobody knows.
No one knows, except for those inhabitants who have been living here since the village was founded, I thought. Finally, I came close to answering the question of who Vega truly was.